Happy Saturday, everybody. Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you with the most up-to-date political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. And first up, the Chinese economy. Fitch Ratings has downgraded China's sovereign credit rating from A+ to A, citing a deteriorating fiscal outlook and rising debt levels. The move, announced Thursday, reflects Fitch's expectation that China's public finances will continue to weaken during the country's economic transition, marked by structural challenges, subdued domestic demand, and mounting external pressures such as rising tariffs. None of this will be unfamiliar to regular viewers. In its statement, Fitch warned that sustained fiscal stimulus used to prop up growth alongside a structurally eroding revenue base will likely keep fiscal deficits elevated. The agency projected that China's government debt to GDP ratio will continue climbing sharply, driven by persistent deficits, the materialization of contingent liabilities, and modest nominal GDP growth. Fitch also highlighted fiscal risks tied to local government financing vehicles, noting that official figures acknowledge 14.3 trillion yuan, 11% of GDP, in hidden debt, which is significantly below some market estimates. The agency said potential future bank recapitalizations to safeguard financial stability could further exacerbate these liabilities. The downgrade comes a day after the United States announced new tariffs on Chinese imports. While Fitch clarified that its decision was based on forecasts made prior to this development, it added that the escalating trade tensions and tariff increases would likely further weigh on China's economy. Although China has diversified its export markets since previous tariff disputes, the latest measures still pose downside risks to growth and fiscal stability. In response, China's Ministry of Finance issued a strong rebuke, calling the downgrade, quote, biased, end quote, and unreflective of the country's true economic conditions. The ministry pointed to China's 5% GDP growth in 2024, among the highest globally, and emphasized the nation's long-term strengths, including technological innovation, urbanization, and ongoing reforms. One of several potential pushbacks to this point is that 5% growth was achieved through surging debt, which was one of the criticisms of the report. Another piece of pushback would be that some analysts do not believe that China actually achieved that 5% growth. Nevertheless, China forecasts a GDP growth of 4.4% in 2025 as domestic challenges in the property and consumer sectors persist. Despite modest improvements in technology and consumption, analysts remain cautious about the country's ability to sustain growth without further exacerbating fiscal pressures. And indeed, as the US-China trade war enters a new, much more turbulent phase, even the next few weeks is difficult to predict, let alone the rest of the year. And speaking of this turbulent new phase, China has unleashed a sweeping set of retaliatory measures in response to US President Donald Trump's latest round of steep tariffs, marking a dramatic escalation in the ongoing trade war between the world's two largest economies. Announced local time late Friday during a national holiday, timed just before the US markets opened, Beijing's countermeasures include a 34% tariff on all US goods, export restrictions on key rare earth minerals, and a wave of regulatory and trade actions against American companies. The new tariffs, effective the 10th of April, directly mirror Trump's own 34% duties on Chinese imports. China's finance ministry labeled Washington's actions, quote, typical unilateral bullying, end quote, accusing the US of violating international trade norms and endangering global commerce. The scale and speed of Beijing's response signal a strategic shift, no longer waiting to act after US tariffs take effect. Beyond tariffs, China rolled out a multi-pronged attack. 1. China will immediately limit exports of 7 critical rare earth elements used in electronics, EVs, and military technology. These controls are likely to ripple through global supply chains. 2. 11 US defense companies were added to China's unreliable entities list, and export controls were imposed on 16 other firms. And 3. China launched anti-dumping probes into US and Indian medical imaging products, signaling a focus on industries where the United States still maintains global competitiveness. The economic fallout was swift. US futures tumbled, with S&P 500 contracts falling 3%. Then during trading on Friday, they fell even more, while European markets erased gains. Commodity markets also felt the sting. Soybeans dropped 2% and wheat and corn slid over 1%. Trump has justified his tariffs as a way of counteracting non-tariff barriers and protecting U.S. industry, claiming that duties are necessary to preserve America's manufacturing base. Yet critics argue that the move risks isolating the United States and further destabilizing the global economy. China has been accused of significant manipulation of its financial system, as well as huge industrial policy moves which have been detrimental to the United States. Notably, Trump has yet to speak directly with Xi Jinping since returning to office, and the growing impasse over issues like fentanyl trafficking has worsened relations. China, once blindsided during Trump's first tariff blitz in 2018, now appears more prepared. Officials have emphasized resilience through diversification of trade partners and a robust fiscal stimulus plan aimed at sustaining their 2025 growth target. Still, with China's export-dependent economy facing mounting international tariffs, Beijing's options may narrow if the trade war drags on. Indeed, it is not just the Americans with whom Beijing has trade disputes. Europe, Japan, India, and others have all introduced tariffs against what it views as China's unfair trade practices. But China's trade relationship with the US is the most important, and its reaction to Trump's tariffs this week are telling. Quote, "This isn't just a tit-for-tat," end quote, said Jade Blanchett of Rand Corporation. Quote, "China's response is carefully calibrated, not to escalate blindly, but to show it will not be pushed around," end quote. Lei Fei, a China economist at Capital Economics, said in a research note yesterday that Beijing's new retaliatory duty pushed the country's average tariff on US imports up to about 50%, marking a, quote, "significant escalation," end quote. Soon after Beijing's announcement of the new tariffs, US President Donald Trump posted on Truth Social, quote, "China played it wrong. They panicked, the one thing they cannot afford to do," end quote. The next moves from both capitals could determine whether this dispute devolves into a full-blown global trade crisis. However, as we have said many times before, with a massive trade surplus with the United States, China is in a much more vulnerable position if this trade war continues. Veteran China analyst Bill Bishop quipped yesterday, quote, "For this tomb-sweeping festival holiday," referring to the traditional Chinese holiday which the country is currently observing, "we may want to go sweep the graves of globalization and US-China trade," end quote. If you're getting some value from today's episode of China Update, as always, it's a huge help if you can hit the like button and subscribe. Approximately 45% of regular viewers are not subscribed. So if you're one of those regular viewers and you want to continue watching and supporting China Update, subscribing is a big help. Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are also in the description. This channel relies primarily on subscriber support, your support to keep going. I now have 2 channels that are primarily supported by subscribers, so if you want to support independent channels like this is also a huge help. Thank you so much. Next up, China has officially arrested 3 Filipino nationals on suspicion of espionage, further straining already tense relations between Beijing and Manila amid an ongoing standoff in the South China Sea. The arrests, announced on Thursday, followed the Philippines' detention of at least 7 Chinese nationals since January on similar charges. According to state media, one was caught conducting surveillance near military facilities under the remote guidance of a Philippine intelligence official. The official reportedly recruited the trio in 2021, trained them in espionage, and dispatched them to China to gather sensitive military information. Footage broadcast on state-run CCTV showed the arrest and included what appeared to be a confession. Chinese officials claim that the case was cracked after months of investigation by national security agencies, leading to the arrests. Some commentators have accused Beijing of simply finding some Filipinos to arrest in response to the arrest of accused Chinese spies in the Philippines, an act of so-called hostage diplomacy, similar to China's approach after the Canadian arrest of Huawei's CFO. China's foreign ministry strongly denies this, and in a statement yesterday emphasized the suspects' rights would be protected, but also accused the Philippines of politicizing espionage cases. Quote, "This is a typical act of stigmatization based on presumption of guilt," end quote. The arrests come at a time of heightened military and diplomatic tensions, with the Philippines deepening defense ties with the United States and continuing its territorial disputes with China in the South China Sea. Both nations have traded accusations in what appears to be a deepening cycle of spy-related tit-for-tat. Some of these spots in the South China Sea remain some of the world's most dangerous geopolitical flashpoints. And finally for today, ByteDance has confirmed that it is in active discussions with the US government to secure a deal that would allow TikTok to continue operating in the United States. The announcement came shortly after President Donald Trump granted a 75-day extension to finalize the sale of TikTok's American operations, delaying a looming ban. In a statement on Friday, ByteDance acknowledged that key issues remain unresolved and stressed that any agreement must comply with Chinese law. That is to say, it needs Beijing's permission. US President Donald Trump, posting on Truth Social, emphasized the administration's progress in crafting a deal, citing the need for additional time to complete necessary approvals. The divestment of TikTok's US business is mandated under a law signed last year by President Biden, originally requiring ByteDance to sell by January 19th. However, with ByteDance reluctant to relinquish such a valuable asset, with some valuations as high as $150 billion, negotiations have been complex. Trump has appointed Vice President J.D. Vance and National Security Advisor Mike Waltz to oversee the process. Among the leading bids is a consortium involving Oracle, Blackstone, and Andreessen Horowitz, which proposes US investors would hold a 50% stake, with ByteDance retaining just under 20%. Oracle would provide security oversight, while ByteDance would keep its algorithm, raising concerns among critics as well as the original lawmakers behind the law to ban the app about data privacy and propaganda risks. The situation reflects a dramatic shift in Trump's 2020 stance when he sought to ban TikTok entirely. He likely now views the app as quite popular, and it would be politically damaging to be behind the ban. Meanwhile, bids from Amazon, Frank McCourt, and even YouTube megastar Mr. Beast remain on the table, but face uncertain prospects. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much everybody for watching. Have a good Saturday, have a restful weekend. There will not be an episode of China Update tomorrow on Sunday. I'm going to try very hard not to release one so we can all enjoy our weekend. But there may be an episode of Market Update tomorrow, as so much has happened this week. But for China Update, that is it for this week. Have a great weekend, and I will see you for a new week of updates on Monday.